Hello and welcome to this episode of the Rest is Entertainment Questions and Answers edition. I'm Marina Hyde.
And I'm Richard Osman, but we have a third person in the studio.
We are so honoured to have one of the great comedy talents of all time with us, Ben Elton, who has a new autobiography out called What Have I Done? And asking him your questions from a career that spanned 40 years, TV comedy, stage comedy, books, musicals. There's very little you haven't done, Ben.
There's very little you haven't made a fortune out of, Ben.
In the realm, there's quite a lot of things I haven't made a fortune out of, but fortunately, some things I did. It's all about writing, though. I mean, I've done a lot of things in the realms of writing comic fiction in various forms and a little bit of comic truth, or at least my truth in terms of stand-up. But yeah, it's all kind of the same job.
It's all the same job. It's putting words in the right order, isn't it?
Exactly.
So every single one of these questions come from our listeners, so forgive us. Yeah, why are you such a...
Oh, you a hypocrite.
Just to start in... that is the first question. Put things in context at the beginning. We'll go sort of fairly chronological. When the young ones came out, I think I was 11 or 12. And for anyone who is my age... and for anyone who's younger, if I can just contextualize it, it was like a bomb went off. The school playground the next day, we had more of a monoculture those days, but it absolutely took the entire country by storm, like crazy. And I think genuinely for me, changed the way I saw television, changed the way I saw comedy. It's one of those things that there was a time before the young ones and a time after the young ones. And so we will start there, but also from me and from my generation, thank you. And for the generation below.
Also, thank you.
Yeah, if you want to know quite why we're going to be so simpering, it's because of that. So everything you've done afterwards as well, we'll talk about that. But we will start with the young ones. Andy Nielsen has a question. He says, the young ones is my favourite all-time sitcom, and lots of other people's. How did you come up with something so chaotic and funny? And what was it like working with Rik Mayall?
Well, Andy, Rik came up with the original concept. I'd known Rik from university days. When I met him when I was 18, and he was only 13 months older than me. He was still only 19, even though he was a third year, which affected our relationship somewhat. He always referred to me as fresher in the early days. And I wrote a lot of comedy plays at university, and Rik did an awful lot of comic sketches and things. And I remembered him, and he remembered him.
And was he very much Rik Mayall even back then?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Rik was, I think of all the people, I've met a lot of really talented and some really charismatic performers, but of all the talented performers I've ever met, the one with the most instant star quality that overwhelmed you when you met him was Rik. And that was in his day. I mean, it changed. I mean, Rik's story is is a very complicated one, and it's not all happy by any means.
The book is very good on all of it.
On Rik,
it's a lot, how it all unfolds.
Yeah, it's difficult. Meeting Rik was love at first sight for me. I think it was for an awful lot of people. Adrian Edmondson was also at Manchester, and they and a few other good, talented comic students did a welcome freshers show for us, and it opened with Rik really doing a monologue about how amazing he was. And of course, he was a spotty student in a great coat, cold breath hanging in the air, fag, everyone was cold. It was this old church in Manchester. And yet Rik lit up the room. It was unquestionable that he was, I mean, his joke really was that he was already a star. He knew it, we knew it. Let's just get over it and start celebrating. And I mean, that was his kind of shtick. And I found it immensely exhilarating. We became really good friends very, very quickly. A couple of years later, after Rik and Ada had a couple of tough years trying to, do their gigs wherever they could, they did a show in Edinburgh called Death on the Toilet. And I was up there for student theatre. I was in Edinburgh as well, and I went and saw their show. It was absolutely brilliant. It opened with, I don't know if this gag is I mean, there's a disableist element, but I think it's okay. The first line, I sat in his little room being like a sort of figure from Waiting for Godot. There's a knock on the door, and the door opens. There's Rik, dressed as death with the big cowl and the scythe and everything. And Rik says, and are we allowed to swear on this?
Yeah. Go on.
And Aid said, who the fuck are you? And Rik says, I'm deaf. And he says, all right, I'll speak louder. Who the fuck are you? And that was the opening gag of Rik and Aid, like when they were 21, 20. Anyway, they got to London, alternative comedy was happening. And I graduated a couple of years later, went to London also. And I got a call in January 81 from Rik saying, Farty, get down the pub immediately. I've got something to talk to you about. And he was there with Lisa May, his girlfriend, and they, between them, had to come up with this thing to do a sitcom, a wild, anarchic sitcom in which anything could happen. And it was to be based very loosely on some characters that he and Aid and Nigel Planer and Pete Richardson, that's another story. It's all in the book. I'm not going to say that again.
Well, I like how you go back and you say the bits that didn't work. I think that's always fascinating for people. And there is an element of the young ones.
Yeah, that didn't work. I mean, What Was Up With Mike was the first. I mean, Chris Ryan was a fantastic actor, generous to a fault, brilliant, but miscast. And no, it wasn't that he was miscast. He did it brilliantly, but the part had totally lost its way. And there's a long story about that, and I'm not going to go into it now. But it's interesting in terms of how comedy and relationships in comedy and the ability to improvise together are all hugely dependent on that moment, on the muse. That when you're on that role, and if something goes wrong, if an atmosphere changes, suddenly. Anyway, look, there's a lot that's great about the young ones. A lot that, in my view, isn't great about the young ones.
Well, that's again, as I say, it went off like a bomb. That show, we'd never seen anything like it. We'll talk a little bit about why that was. But even as an 11-year-old, you're kind of going, but what's up with Mike?
Yeah, it was something of a poisoned chalice that was given to a great actor. I mean, look, it's. I mean, I can tell the story if you like, but it's quite a long story.
So Rik rings you up, and says, "So you are 21."
Yes,
so this is
21,
the stage where you're supposed to sort of for the next 5 or 6 years do the odd student review, write a couple of gags for radio comedies, this, that, the other, build this kind of career and then maybe pitch a sitcom. But at 21, you go to the pub, Rik has this idea and you literally go home and write it?
That night, yeah. It was immensely exciting time. I've always worked fast. Sometimes it's gone against me. Sometimes I've thrown too many words at a project and they've kind of all missed. And sometimes I've got it right. And this was one really wonderful night. Rik was inspiring in the pub. At that point, as I say, I loved Rik. I mean, it was a platonic love, but I was sort of in love with him. All I wanted was to make him laugh. I knew how to make him laugh. I knew how to write towards his particular talent. And the same a bit with Aid and Nigel. Rik's idea was this anarchic thing, and what it needed was flesh. And I remember him saying now, you're a writer, you've written loads and loads of plays, now you can write this. He was, saying, look, if get all their insults wrong, if somebody insults him, say, look, I'm not a fid, And I can still remember him saying that line, and that line went obviously straight into the show. But I went home and thought very hard about what was a very embryonic, sort of quite rough and ready idea. Quite a lot of the characters, I mean, Rik's poet didn't have any socialist pretensions. He was into theatre. Aid and Rik did these two kind of furious men, the Dangerous Brothers. But again, they could have been middle-aged. Nigel's Neil at that time was in his mid-30s and had already contracted herpes on an ashram in India. What I wanted to do was make it about youth in the early 1980s. Give it that Thatcher's Britain slant. And it all happened very, very quickly. I mean, I was immensely fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. I'm not unaware of the privilege of that. But yeah, I definitely was on a roll that night and in those early weeks.
But you're also the right person in the right place at the right time. So you're being presented with something which is essentially chaos, which is 4 very different performers, all of whom have certain things that they can bring to a role. Your job as a writer, which is often the job as a writer, is to take that chaos, to preserve that chaos, but give it an A to B, give it a journey, give it some sort of structure.
Well, to preserve the chaos, give it some semblance of plot. But more than that, what was required was a contemporary edge. Because people think that the young ones was this groundbreaking thing. Oh, you came in, you kicked down all the walls and changed everything. And they always think about, rats talking in the floorboards and Vivian coming through a wall and things. But actually all that is very much a part of the British tradition of comedy. Go and see the Crazy Gang well, you can't now, but if you've gone in the 1940s to their Palladium shows, they were beating each other up, smashing the furniture up. Rik and Aid were obsessed with Laurel and Hardy. And Laurel and Hardy, the sort of calculated an anarchic violence of their relationship. So much of what people think was groundbreaking thing, it was relatively new for a sitcom, not for television. The Pythons, of course, somebody playing a piano, the lid comes down and his hands are cut off and he's spurting blood. The Goon Show, completely all over no walls for the Goon Show. They broke every one.
Yeah.
So, but I think what was original about the young ones, and I guess I do you know, it's certainly something I was very concerned to get in there, was its contemporary feel. BBC sitcom in the 70s had got very middle class. It had a great tradition of doing more blue-collar comedy, Steptoe and Son, Till Death Us Do Part, The Likely Lads. But by then, there were great shows, the likes of The Good Life, which I famously had a go at on the young ones through Vivian, but I loved it nonetheless. But to give kids a sitcom, to do a sitcom based on exaggerated but recognizable youth types of the early 80s, the kind of hangover hippie who's still wearing flared trousers 3 years after punk, the actual punk, you know, Vivian sort of wants to be an anarchist at all times, and of course the farty geography student who pretends he's a socialist. You all know he's going to end up working in a bank and voting Conservative. He's probably Rick's character would probably be voting Reform by now. So that
he'd be standing for Reform.
Oh yeah. He'd certainly have a GB News show.
What I think was original about The Young was actually isn't the bit that kind of most people celebrate as its groundbreaking nature.
It was an enormous and almost, and I know you had a year or so between writing, you know, going home and writing that thing and being in the studio, and it was an enormous hit. What does that do to you? You'd never really had a professional flop. You'd put on loads of plays and things have not worked for you.
Oh no,
they were students.
They all worked as students.
Yeah.
But what does it do to you to have that immediate success for a young?
At that age?
What does it do to you? What did it do to Rik and Aid and Nigel and Chris?
I think we all, I mean, obviously Chris had a different situation because as we've just discussed, that was the sort of least formed and least recognisable character, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I think we all were too busy and too happy to notice. So also, there was a lot of unhappiness certainly for me. I mean, The Young was written by three people, there's no question. Rik and Lisa worked together and I worked together. I know my bits and I know their bits. And that was very unhappy for me because originally I'd had a much closer writing relationship with Rik. And I think that breaking up was, I think, quite consequential for Rik going forward into the future of his career. But leaving that aside, what was it like in 81 or 82? I think everyone was thrilled, but we had no concept of how big it was. You don't go at first, there was no internet or anything like that. You know, we knew we were getting, well, I wasn't getting recognised. And of course, they weren't so much because they were all covered in, spots and makeup and all sorts. So I don't think it really impacted us. We knew we could afford more beer and more curry, and we were young. We were celebrating life. We loved to go to the pub. We loved to go out. I have always spent far too much time looking forward to the next thing and worrying about how good it is and did we get it right to celebrate enough. That's one of the things I learned right in the book that perhaps I should have calmed down a bit at times, but you know, whatever. It's been a very happy life, so I've got no complaints. But the fact that we became instantly so famous, well, I'll give you an example, right? Yes, we were huge. The thing was talked about by everyone. Everybody knew about it. And when we came to do the book, it sold 750,000 copies.
The book, I still think, is one of the greatest works of literature.
Yeah.
That was the last time I think Rik and I really kind of had fun working on stuff together. Again, Lisa and Rik were writing stuff, and a lot of it was great that went into the book. I was doing my stuff. But Rik and I sort of did some stuff in the pub together. That was fun, the book. And that kind of was the last time, really. Filthy Rich is another story. But the fame thing, right? So obviously Young Ones was huge. So they did a little tour. I wasn't involved. It was called Kevin Turvey and the Bastard Squads, featuring the Young Ones.
Kevin Turvey was a Rik character.
Was a Rik character. I maybe did a couple of lines, but that was Rik's, one of his organic inventions that he really did himself. They went on tour. Now, if the equivalent of the Young Ones, not that there would be an equivalent these days, probably the last time you had anything remotely nationally focused that had as big an impact would go back to Little Britain or something that the kids were into. I mean, now it would be arenas. There'd be no question. It would be absolutely arenas because while the media is shrinking, while television is shrinking, and live, go figure, is getting bigger. People crave the communal experience because they don't get it off the telly anymore. They're not all watching the same show anymore. But the Young Ones back in the day, touring in 82, 83, after the first series, they were playing 400 people in a half-full student union. Live just wasn't the thing.
I mean, isn't that absolutely crazy? Because it was...
the biggest
enormous
thing.
I mean, they got to fill them out in the end, but it was still only 800. They did about 2 weeks, and it was student unions. It's so interesting to think that even, you know, Bowie was still playing Hammersmith. The biggest gigs you could do were still theatres. The arena thing hadn't happened, and people weren't used to that going out en masse, you know, because I guess there was too much good stuff on the telly, and you got your community experience by just watching it and talking about it the next day.
morning.
Yeah.
You've hinted a couple of times that your relationship with Rik didn't really survive the young one. Your
My
creative
professional
relationship.
We remained close friends all our lives, and we worked together. We toured together as stand-ups in the 80s.
I remember. I went to it.
Oh my goodness, did you, Richard?
Well,
that is so cool.
Suddenly there's this thing of saying, oh, look, it's like a two-part. It's like a live thing. And Ben Elton is doing half and Rik Mayall is doing half.
Yes,
and
please.
Everybody in Britain was like, I'm so sorry, that might be the greatest evening. Well, it was indeed.
It's lovely to hear. Again, even though Rik was, I still wasn't a star at that time. It was pre-Saturday Live. I became famous overnight in 1986.
Because you became front of house.
Yeah.
Because before you were the writer,
I was the
then
writer.
Suddenly you were
So again,
the whole
fame
thing.
didn't really, even though I was hugely delighted to have a sitcom on the BBC and to be earning some money, and it led Richard Curtis to watch it and ring me up and say, do you want to come in on reinventing the Blackadder? So
we're going to talk about that next.
Fame was wonderful, but in terms of being famous, honestly, just didn't notice. And of course, I wasn't famous. I was a writer. Yeah. And when I went out on tour, Rik insisted we had equal billing and he split the money equally because that's how we always were. But even though he was this massive star, we were still playing some student unions, mainly town halls, 1,500 seaters. But again, the equivalent now would be a week at the O2 for somebody of Rik's impact. So yes, Rik and I still, and we worked together on Filthy.
Were you always trying to get back to that feeling with him that you had in those moments where, creatively, but you could never get back there? I've really felt that in the book. There was that moment, a sort of prelapsarian thing where you're just kind of perfectly fused as creative.
The two of you in the pub.
Yeah.
I start the book kind of at Rik's funeral because obviously that was a massive thing in my life, as it was in many people's life, though, even for those who didn't know him. But the story I tell is that I'd actually tried to write a sitcom for Rik, sort of forum with him, because when you work with Rik, you're always looking for his feedback. He would edit with laughter. He was the most generous laugher I've ever met. And I'd read him my scripts. So I used to write in longhand, and he couldn't read my writing, and I'd read them, and he would just laugh, and his rich fruit, the exact opposite of giving Rowan a script. So diametrically opposite.
Rowan Atkinson.
Two genius performers, their personalities and the way they kind of dealt with input from writers who knew how to serve them was very different. I love Rowan, he's a dear friend, but there was no generous roars of laughter
There's
from
a bit
Rowan.
in the book where you go and see Rowan Atkinson and he just turns over the pages and puts them beside as he's going through the whole script. There's not a huge amount of feedback there.
There's an idea here somewhere. I quite like the first word of this one. Literally, that was like 2 comments over an hour, whereas Rik would roar and roar. And yes, because Rik and my relationships kind of schismed during the young ones. He and Lisa went off and wrote a night. It wasn't we didn't acknowledge it, although there was a number of decisions made during the young ones, which Rik made because he was the power. Yeah. Rik was the golden one. It was Rik's show, and I was very lucky that he'd invited me in as writer, or as a writer, as it turned out. And so, yes, that was a difficult time, and Filthy was perhaps an even more difficult time for
Filthy Rich and Cat Flap, which is a sort of follow-up version of that. Much more theatrical based.
Yes, whereas the young ones came from a place of truth. Comedy, no matter how big it is, as long as it's rooted in truth, as long as there's a kind of honesty to what you're doing, it doesn't matter how vast and grotesque the character is. And so you look at somebody like Mike Myers' creation of Austin Powers, or the ex, Rick's Flash Art, or whatever. Obviously created with the writers. But, let's we forget.
Take your credit, Ben.
But, well, you're certainly not getting it from the actors on the Blackadder, let me tell you. But let's not go there. Look, my relationship with Rik was always one of love, and it was unfinished business. And I always dreamt that we would finish it. I felt that his extraordinary talent was never fully blossomed. It shone so brightly, and then it kind of got a little bit lost, and not everything he did was so great, and I could no longer busk with him, and of course Bottom was a wonderful thing. My view is the only 2 people who ever really knew how to write with and for Rik were me and Aid, and both relationships were very, very complicated. And of course Rik's drinking became a problem, and I can say this because I've talked to Barbara. She gave Barbara Mayall, his wife. She's, I said, do you mind if I talk about that in my book? And she wrote me a beautiful letter and said, no, it was a part of all our lives, particularly yours, and you must tell your story. And So yeah, Rik went on. There was his biggest hero of all was Hancock, and there were Tony Hancock, and there are elements of the Hancock trajectory to Rik, because he was slightly at the mercy of the material. He could come up with great stuff, but he always went too big. He needed material.
Yeah.
So
and he needs that structure, and he needs he needs a narrative, and some of those great performers can just explode like they want, but you need to root them.
And some detail in character, they can't be as broad a strokes as he would like to. Basically, for both me and Aid, Rik's death deprived us both of an ongoing hope and indeed presumption that we would, me with Rik, and not the three of us. I mean, Rik and Aid worked together and I and Rik worked together. I've also worked with Aid, but, it's all terribly triangular. We always thought we'd get there in the end. And I always thought I would get back to Rik in the end. And of course, we went for a jog and fell over in the shower and died.
I mean, the sitcom that we've been denied of Rik in his 70s, or just, that's the beautiful thing you could have written. But you know what?
It still makes me very, very sad.
But it exists for all of us who are fans because we can imagine it.
Yeah.
Because, we know what that relationship is. So you've done The Young Ones. It's been a huge hit. We'll get onto your stand-up in a bit, but if we can just keep talking about you as a writer, I think so. You've had this hit, and people have hits, right? We understand that, but it can be a flash in the pan. If you follow it up with another hit, an even bigger hit, then suddenly you go, oh, okay.
So we have a good question on this from Ewan, who says, the progress between The Blackadder to Blackadder the Second, The Blackadder is basically Blackadder Season 1, which you didn't write on. The progress between The Blackadder to Blackadder the Second counts among the most astonishing transformations in any series of television. I agree. A quantum leap in quality. Was it sold to you as a brief when you joined that it would have to be a clean slate, starting the whole idea again completely from scratch, or was it more organic?
There was no brief because it was a wonderful thing. I owe, just as I owe The Young Ones to Rik, I think I paid the debt, but I certainly owe it to him. I owe Blackadder to Richard Curtis. One of the things I am most happy about in my life is that I don't think I've ever not been friends in a professional. All the people I've worked with became and remain dear friends. And in fact, Richard interviewed me about this book only in Cheltenham just the other night, 40 years after or more after the wonderful phone call when he asked me to join him on Blackadder 2. Now, whisper it not. It's not, I think Ewan has basically said it, but Blackadder 1 was not considered a comprehensive success. Yeah. And
it was cancelled, right?
Well, yeah, that was a little later. That's another very good story. What happened for me was Rowan had dropped out. Rowan and Richard wrote The Blackadder. It was his nickname in those days. We changed a lot of things, not least he became Mr. Blackadder. If I'd been Richard at that point, I would have written it on my own. I'd have said, thank goodness Rowan doesn't want to pretend he's a sitcom writer anymore. Now I can get down to it. To my great and glorious good fortune, Richard is a more subtle and perhaps more interesting person than me because he thought, no, I definitely still want to collaborate. Yeah. And I know who I want to collaborate with. And Richard doesn't collaborate very often. I mean, he wrote all his fabulous movies on his own. So what it was that led him to decide to share with me, I think it was kind of The Young Ones, kind of comes back to Rik, my comedy DNA. So Richard wanted me in, and no, there was no brief. He said, look, we're going to do it again. The BBC say we can have another crack, but clearly it hasn't worked that well. Let's have a go at it again.
So the first series had been sort of an historical epic, shot kind of very beautifully, shot sort of from a distance, and just not... Yeah.
They were trying to make Holy Grail for a sitcom. I mean, a kind of medieval comedy film, but in sitcom. And as John Lloyd, the producer, very wittily said, it looked $1 million. Unfortunately, it cost $2 million. And as I said in the very first meeting, Rowan falling off a horse at 300 meters in Panavision is no different to the unit caterer falling off a horse. What you need is Rowan close up, but more importantly,
his
what
status.
You need is Rowan funny. And whisper it not, but Rowan's not very funny in Blackadder 1. Because his idiot shtick isn't as funny as his superior shtick. I mean, Mr. Bean aside with that curious nihilism, but even that sometimes was sort of like the kind of slightly worrying, I like Mr. Bean, but I didn't particularly like the Blackadder. And I said, surely, the decision Richard and I made together on our first morning working together was to flip the status, to make, in the first series, Rowan had been the idiot and Baldrick had been the smart one. and we turned it on its head and made Rowan the smart one and Baldrick the idiot. And certainly that was something which was a deal breaker for me, because I love when Rowan is being superior and supercilious. There is no one on earth more funny. You know, if he's sat at a desk and there's a knock at the door and he goes, come in. You just know something hilarious.
Well, it informs all the insult comedy that comes later. Yeah. And so many people come in on the slipstream of that. And there's so many great shows which you can see are entirely informed by his particular form of withering insult.
Yeah. And Richard and I kind of invented a language. The whole, the thing, Blackadder speak, you're as small as a very small thing that's got a degree in being small, or whatever, that everybody's been doing for 40 years. I mean, that started on our typewriters, because there were no computers then. I mean, words have always been my obsession. I mean, Young Ones language also for a while. I mean, Smash Hits was basically written, the magazine, pop magazine, was basically written in girly swat language, from 82 onwards.
And is it often the case as a writer, because you're so prolific, that is it often the case that one line or one comic idea that you suddenly feel, the taps are on? That you come across something, you think, but if this were like this, and suddenly you can write, suddenly you get out of your own way. In the same way as flipping those two, you go into the room thinking, if you flip these two, I see where the plots are, I see where the comedy is.
You can't understand what it is. It has to be organic. Woody Allen, I think, spoke for all comic writers, probably all artists, when he said, when I write a joke, I'm hearing it for the first time. Basically, you don't know, it just happens. And you have to let it happen. Just as a painter, can't stare at the blank canvas forever. You've got to commit a stroke. You can't plan it. You've just got to do it. And hopefully it will lead to another, and eventually you'll kind of find out what you're doing. But if you're working, as I've had the privilege to do, with some of the greatest comic performers, comic actors of any generation, then that makes the excitement considerably greater, because if you're working towards a talent like Rik's or Rowan's or Melchett, or Stephen, because I knew them all very, very well, and you're working towards something you already understand. And occasionally, sometimes I think, well, once or twice, actors did, drop in a good idea, and you think, well, so you should be.
Every now and then we let them have one.
Well,
can I talk a little bit about that? Because I do think that it's really interesting, because everyone thinks that the writing in Blackadder was just beyond, and it just, as you say, it redefined a whole different form of comic writing, you and Richard. And yet it's quite clear in the book that the pair of you have a little bit of a struggle, even though all those guys are your great friends.
And remain so,
and remain so. And when talking, Hugh Laurie, Rowan, obviously Stephen Fry, all of them are and remain your great friends. But it was hard.
And it was a pretty unhappy experience, right? No, not right. Writing the Blackadder was immensely happy. Yeah. Richard and I, just the two of us. If we'd just done a podcast, we'd have had the loveliest time. Yeah. We loved every minute of it. We became the closest of friends, and it was a wonderful experience. Then the first bump in the road was doing the scripts with John Lloyd, who's could be very fierce, very clever man, often right, not always right.
The producer.
Yeah, one of the big producers did Not the 9 O'Clock News, did QI more lately. Yeah.
That was difficult because Richard and I felt we knew what we were doing, and John thought he knew what he was doing, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And John, of course, was the producer, and he was senior and the boss, and he'd always say, boys, Benji, Dick, you're both geniuses. I understand that. I'm just the smallest, tiny producer. I'm a minnow simply here to enable your glorious talent. But can you just allow me to be right just this fucking once? And of course, it was always one more time. But we got through that and we produced the scripts. Then would you get to rehearsal? Now, what happens in rehearsal normally? First morning at North Acton BBC rehearsal rooms, everyone has a table read. There's some polite laughter, and then you get up and start to work it.
So a table read, you've given the scripts, all the actors turn up, they sit around all next to each other, you read through, everyone sees what works, what doesn't work, costume a lot, thinking, what can I do here? It's just, it's a lovely sort of, normally, that kind of, the first run of something.
My first experience, I didn't go to Cambridge, I went to Manchester, but with the exception of me and I suppose Baldrick, there wasn't a single non-Oxbridge graduate in the room. Wow. And basically those table reads were like what I believe Cambridge tutorials were like, in as much as you've got your tutor, your all-seeing tutor, that's John, and a bunch of students, and then some timorous student produces their work to be reviewed by the group. But of course only Richard and I were bringing our essays in. So the script would be read, And then I got to be honest. I mean, Stephen knows I say it. There's Stephen. And Hugh to a certain extent, he was nice. But Stephen and John.
Some of our finest British public school actors, these were. Of course.
Yes, they push their chest. Cigarettes would be like a great weary sigh would sort of come out, and there'd be a half-hour discussion on whether the word "wibble" was funny or not. And it was like it was soul destroying. You could spend hours deciding which furry rodent would be most amusing to stick up Baldrick's bottom. Would it be a vole or a gerbil or what? I stopped going after the first week.
Really?
I mean, I knew the script. Look, every now and then something good came up. I mean, Stephen, to his enormous credit, came up with the idea of calling, in Blackadder 4, calling Tim McInerney's character Darling, which was just a work of, it was a stroke of absolute brilliance. But, a couple of the things he didn't write. And there's some slight gall as the years go by, which they all know. And as I say, I'm very close to them all. But at the time, I just didn't go. But Richard went the whole time, and he would sit there, said, can we just rehearse it? And often, you just come back round to the original script. Yeah. Sometimes it'd change a bit, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes for the worse. I think Blackadder's Christmas Carol was a considerably better script on the page than it was after it had been tutorialised to death for 3 days.
I need to go back and watch that immediately now.
It was, it's not bad, but it goes way off the rails, that. I mean, it was the only time I got as angry with John as he regularly got with me and Richard, because I really thought they fucked it up. I mean, it's okay, but it's not as good. I mean,
can I just say, I love that you all constantly have dinner with each other forever now. And there's all this water under the bridge, which is great. I love that whole kind of creative thing.
The nice thing is, in the end, it was a hit. And that's
and it was a very satisfying hit. Many friendships. But as I say, when you write towards... This is just quick, interesting sidebar, right? So you've got all these actors, right? And as I say, Richard and I were glorying in their talent. We kind of knew how they were going to deliver all these lines, which makes it so much more exciting to write the lines. You've got, if you're giving Stephen Fry a melt shit line, you've got a pretty good idea how he's going to do it. And it's going to be even better when he does it. Even with the genius of Rowan, we always pretty much knew what was coming. The one actor that you never knew how they were going to speak the speech and never asked questions a single syllable was Miranda Richardson as
she's
Queenie.
Amazing.
We loved her so much. She just took the script and invented her own private madness. You never knew what random emphasis she was going to hit next, and every time it was a stroke of organic genius. And it was interesting. Richard and I always used to say the one Blackadder actor who we didn't kind of know how they were going to sound was Miranda.
That's amazing, isn't it?
I love that. So many people believe that the final scene of Blackadder Goes Forth is the greatest ending of a comedy series, and in some cases, the greatest ending of any TV series they've ever seen.
I think it is.
Did you know when you'd written it, but you didn't even go and watch it being filmed?
I think I was there on the last episode.
Okay.
Look, the thing is, all good sitcom is a community effort, and studio sitcom is above all a community effort. It really does take a village, and a very large village, to make a studio sitcom. Just to be clear for your listeners and viewers, studio sitcom is a theatrical presentation. You present a half-hour comedy to a live audience. The only thing is, between you and them is 7 or 8 cameras, booms hanging over their heads, and it's being mixed live. It's a beautiful thing. People say, oh, the laughter sounds canned. It's not canned. When you hear that laugh, when the German says, "What is your name, boy?" and Mannering says, "Don't tell him, Pike," the laughter you're hearing is the genuine laugh, just the same as with all our shows. That sometimes, of course, you do a second take, so you might put the first laugh on, but basically the actors are timing their work. Anyway, it's a beautiful community experience, right? And the reason I bring this up, not just because for some reason the success of single camera sitcoms like The Office, brilliant as they are, because we're British, we instantly have to see a downside and say, well, we hate those old-fashioned studio sitcoms like what? Well, like Fawlty Towers, Only Fools and Horses, Dad's Army.
Porridge.
Anyway, it takes a village to make a good show, and it took a village to do the last scene of Blackadder. Richard and I wrote, I think, a sensitive script. We were very aware through the whole of Blackadder Goes Forth that this was a very different comic dynamic.
Yeah.
I mean, millions dying of the plague in the Elizabethan era. You know it was a tragedy for those people, but you can't really feel it.
Yes, long time ago.
Really. I mean, when I was doing Upstart
We're better
Crow,
at it now.
Yeah, I guess now we've had our own place.
Given events.
Yeah. But when I was doing Crow, I tried to do that. I tried to make Hamnet's death. Like they were parents. But sorry, I'm leaping like a mountain.
That's right. Upstart Crow.
Mountain goat
yeah.
from point to point. The point was Blackadder's the final scene we knew that, but don't forget, it was only written in 88. So a lot of veterans were still alive from that war, let alone the family. Both my grandparents fought in the war, on either side in my case. So, we knew it was real tragedy and the most appalling death of a generation. So we were writing with, I think, some care and an instinctive need to do a different form of comedy about the deaths. But then, of course, we bring in John, the producer, Richard Bowden, the director, the brilliant, as was, BBC in-house special effects. They had a tiny studio. They had so little facilities, costume, makeup. I mean, a vast number of people put their talents into creating that moment. I would probably say Richard and John, the producer and director, are definitely led it. They are the heroes of that moment. Our script said I think it's a great last line. You'd have to, you have to be mad to be here. No point pretending to be mad. So Richard and I teed it up nicely and we said they go over the top. I think we might have put silent drum or something like that. And so then Richard and John are planning it, and then they bring in the team, and something truly beautiful was produced. And I feel there is no false humility here. I know what I did on the Blackadder, but I feel hugely privileged to have been a part of a team that produced not just that final scene, but the whole thing. Because it really does take a village to make anything worth having. This world where we look to leadership from strong men, be they movie directors or presidents, is madness. It's communities that make the difference.
I will say this though, and everyone remembers the poppy fields and what have you. But if anyone wants to go and get the script, so you look at the script for that entire last episode. I don't think there's a word out of place in the episode, which comes from you created these characters who you loved, and you created so many comic worlds that you could go anywhere with them. But I don't think there's a word out of place, and particularly in that last scene, I think it was one of the greatest comic scenes in British sitcom because it's so beautiful and it's real people who we care about, and they've been so silly and so ridiculous for so long, but we loved them and we believed in them. And so I think the script does.
Well, that's really lovely to hear, and we were proud of it. And then watching Hugh realise that all his friends are dead, and that and watching Tim's character, Darling, realise that the Tiddlywinkers are no more. That it's 1970, the Great War of 14 to 17.
Which is an amazing line.
Anyway.
It's very beautiful. We'll finish the Blackadder thing with a question from Nicholas, which is a different note. How much money would a streamer need to offer yourself, Richard Curtis and Rowan Atkinson to make another Blackadder series?
I honestly don't think that it is in any sense a question of money. All of us are fine. We're all very comfortable. I mean, we're not all the same level of comfortable. Rowan, thank you very much. Blackadder was a labour of love 40 years ago. I mean, we wrote the last one in 88. It was made in 89. Any little efforts at doing anything since, I think, have been pretty grim. I've never been, happy even with the idea of doing it, let alone seeing what happened. I mean, all right, but, the only reason we would ever do anything Adderish again would be because we wanted to.
Yep.
And there is no desire to do it. As I say, I know it sounds sort of like I'm overplaying it, but, I literally exchanged 2 emails with Rowan only yesterday trying to see if we could, meet before I go back to Australia. We remain all such close friends. And I think one of the reasons that we are is that we aren't going to do another series of Blackadder.
Well, listen, how can you follow? How can you follow the end of the last one as well? It's beautiful.
This episode is brought to you by Sky and the brand new series All Her Fault.
Now, All Her Fault is a brand new whodunit, combining psychological thriller with modern-day paranoia of a so-called perfect life.
At the centre is Sarah Snook, fresh from her Emmy Award-winning turn in Succession, leading and executive producing. She's joined by a formidable cast, including Dakota Fanning of The Perfect Couple and Jake Lacey of The White Lotus, both with their own brand of diabolical schemes.
Now, All Her Fault is adapted from Andrea Mara's best-selling novel. It's directed by Minky Spiro. It's done Three Body Problem, Downton Abbey, and promises to explore themes of motherhood, trust and secrets with prestige and confidence.
It's the whodunit modernised. Less country house candlesticks, more white picket fear.
8 episodes all ready to unravel in one sitting, and each one leaves you less certain of the people you think you know best.
Watch the brand new series of All Her Fault exclusively on Sky. All episodes available from the 7th of November. Requires relevant Sky TV subscription.
This episode is brought to you by Sky, where you can watch unmissable shows, including Sky exclusive All Her Fault.
Yes, this is a glossy psychological thriller executive produced by Sarah Snook, who we all loved or loathed in her multi-award-winning turn in Succession.
Shiv, she is in Succession.
She also stars alongside Dakota Fanning and Jake Lacey.
And it's a proper old school whodunit, like a domestic whodunit. Why do you think people are obsessed with whodunits? I have an opinion, of course.
Well, this is one of those very glossy whodunits where on the surface it's all play dates, polite suburbs, amazing kitchens, which is now like the quintessential thing for one of these whodunits.
I love that whenever I watch any show and they just go down a normal American suburban street or like a British side street and you just go, oh, someone's going to get murdered. This is going to be amazing.
And All Her Fault is exactly this. It thrives on that kind of paranoia, the sense that anyone could be guilty, anyone could be innocent. But it does lean into the whole fact that whodunits now become cultural obsessions, and social media has driven it completely. All of the reaction shots that people do, all the videos, it becomes viral much, much quicker, and it has definitely been sort of farmed out much quicker now. And everybody, I think, particularly because of social media, they have to have these key moments, even in episode 1, where you think, oh, I think I've just seen it. I think I've just unlocked the whodunit from this one gifable moment in episode 1.
That's the beauty of a whodunit. I often get asked the question about why do we love mysteries? And I think it's because, we live in a world full of intractable problems. We live in a world where like everything's so knotty and you think, well, how are we going to get out of this? And actually, in the real world, we don't know how we're going to get out of situations. Whereas in a mystery, if it's a book or if it's something like All Her Fault, we are in a situation where we are shown an impossible problem that we think, well, we're never going to find our way out of this. We all know by the end of the last episode that we will find out what happens. I think that's very soothing for people.
I agree, but I do also think, furthermore, we all think we're experts and we all think we're detectives.
Oh, 100%. We absolutely think we know exactly who's done it.
And in the old days, you used to just sit on your sofa and bore your family with your theories, but now you're able to do it with everybody online and you can just take part in the whole frenzy. And there is such a sort of premium on having been right in episode 1.
Well, you can't. I could never watch any mystery shows with my mum because she was always immediately right. She'd always go, "Oh, I bet it's him. I bet there's a twin." And you're like, "Oh, great,
thanks so much."
Now I can't watch. Now I can't watch the rest of it. So I would not be watching this with my mum because she would ruin it for me immediately. I never know until the end of a book who the murderer is really when I write it. So people say to me sometimes, "Oh, I worked out who did it in the first 10 pages," and you think, "Well done," because I didn't.
Just get a lucky guess.
Yeah.
Watch the brand new series All Her Fault from the 7th of November exclusively on Sky. Requires relevant Sky TV subscription.
Do not watch it with my mum.
Now, moving on to We Will Rock You, the whole idea of the jukebox musical. Okay, Nadia Hills is saying, what were Bryan May and Roger Taylor's first reaction to your plot for We Will Rock You? It does capture the bombastic nature of Queen, but they've never really thought about them having a sci-fi vibe. Where were you struck by that?
Their reaction, Nadia, thank you for that question, was wonderful. The pitch I made wasn't really sci-fi-y.
Yeah. How did it come about?
Yeah.
We Will Rock You.
It was one of the great gifts of my life. I was in Stuttgart with Bryan the night before last as we opened a new production in Stuttgart that I've directed over there. So it is a wonderful thing.
20 million people have seen this thing. 20 million.
Well, I love Bryan and Roger. We formed a... you made friends with everyone. I have. I work with people... it becomes a bond. And when you're putting your heart and soul into something, you get very close to people. And they did too. So what happened was some 25 years ago now, one of the great good fortunes of one of my representatives, one of my agents, a fella called Paul Roberts, he's from Preston. He said, "Man, Queen have phoned. They want to do a greatest hits musical. They want you to write it." I thought, oh my God, I can't believe it. It turns out what actually was the case, he'd gone to Queen and said, "If you ever thought of doing a greatest hits musical, would you be interested in Ben writing it?" And their manager Jim had said, "Well, maybe we could talk."
Oh my God, that is all of show business summed up
in one interaction.
Yeah. Slightly different reaction. Yeah. But what had happened was Queen were already looking. Jim Beach was already the manager, played by Tom Hollander in the movie. Queen were already looking at doing a greatest hits movie based on the life of Freddie. They'd even done a workshop with De Niro's company, Tribeca. He was a big fan. Why wouldn't he be? He's the exact generation to be a huge Queen fan. And I think anybody who says they don't like Queen is just kind of mad because there's songs you don't have to like every song, but there's so much in it.
Yeah.
Anyway, they'd done this workshop of Freddie's about Freddie's horror, the this great tragedy of Freddie's death from AIDS. And Bryan and Roger had gone over and seen it and said, well, that's not us. That's, that's not who we are. That's not what Freddie was. We're not a tragedy. We're not a death from a disease. We're Queen.
Yeah. We are the champions.
Yeah. They didn't like it. And above all, they hadn't liked the fact there was no comedy in it. They said, well, Freddie was the funniest man on earth. We've always had a laugh. Look at us. Look at what we wear. Look at what we we are fun.
Do we not like people who take ourselves seriously?
We are not being serious, I promise.
They do take themselves seriously, but in a good way, in a proper way. They love entertainment. They love showbiz, and they love being rock stars. And anyway, so Jim originally came to me and said, look, the main thing is we've got this script, but there's no laughs in it. And can you put some gags in? I said, what, put some gags in the script about Freddie dying of AIDS? It can be done. No subject is beyond comedy. If it's done sensitively and properly, I bet I could have put some good laughs into it. But I didn't think it was the right idea. I said, the Queen should not be Freddie's story. Queen belonged to us all. It's not even Queen. Queen shouldn't be Queen's story. Queen is everybody's story. I left home when I was 16. I lived in really quite depressing digs. For the first term, I was doing my A-levels away from home, and I was...
It's good when you get the caravan, though, in the book. I'm happy when you get the caravan.
When I finally moved into my own little caravan, and it's beautiful, and I started making friends and everything. But I had a very lonely start as a 16-year-old on my own. And Queen were number one with Bohemian Rhapsody for the entire first term that I was away, the autumn of 75. So everybody has Queen in their DNA, in their hearts. And I said the show has to reflect the vibe of the band, not the story of Freddie or the story of Bryan or the story of the band. It reflects the vibe. So I said, you need a great legendary, a colossal, an Arthurian epic. And Jim said, sounds good, write it. But I was very, very busy writing a musical with Andrew Lloyd Webber at the time and making my movie, Maybe Baby. No wonder I irritated people. So it took a year. But then I had this idea. I'd been to see The Matrix, and I couldn't, I mean, it's great fun, but I couldn't understand. What is the purpose of keeping humanity enslaved in computers? There are always these films about, humanity's being by some dark force control. But where's the profit? Basically, humanity is only any use to dark forces if you can profit from them. And I think in The Matrix, they end up eating them or something. We're being stored for food. Maybe that's rubbish. I don't know. But I got this idea.
The Matrix is good, Ben.
It's a good film. It out there. Yeah. It's a wonderful film. But I thought, really, a dystopian future, if it's not World War III, if it's not just, anarchy and Mad Max, would be actually endless consumerism. It would be a point where the computers were used to trap people's brains and keep their attention and give them endless pap.
Never going to happen.
I can't see it. I can't see it.
So this was 1999, and I wrote them a synopsis about a world in which machines produce the music, they're performed by holograms and beamed directly through personal communication devices to the punters, so the kids remain continually locked in an entertainment spiral controlled by a vast media conglomerate. That was 1999.
That's essentially this podcast every week.
Yeah. and I said, but on somewhere on this planet, in this future world, one guitar has been, and I said, because the one thing this media conglomerate would never want to see would be the kids making their own music. They don't want punk rock. They don't want rock and roll or hip hop, because they want to keep producing this endless computer-produced pap, which will keep them. And I said, so this hairy, legendary rock collective have left one guitar buried in rock, and he who can draw it forth and play the mighty riffs will free the kids, and live music will be played again. And that was the kind of pitch I made to them. And they loved it. and they loved it. And so that was the beginning of We Will Rock You. And it was quite prescient, because we set it 300 years in the future. And 4 years later, the Napster case happened. Then the MP3 was invented. The iPhone came 5 years after We Will Rock You opened. And the rest is a very sad descent. I mean, the kids still do make their own music, but my goodness, they're making it harder to make a living out of it,
Yeah, funnily enough, we were just talking about that on our other episode this week. It's been an enormous hit everywhere around the world. And you've done things, by the way, that you're proud of that haven't been hits. I'm sure you've done things that you were less proud of that were hits. This has been the thing that probably financially
definitely
is the thing that's made the most money.
4 musicals, 3 lost money, but if you've got one that does, you're all right.
What is it, do you think, that makes a hit? What is it? Have you at any point, because you've seen every side of that coin, do you... How do you know, when do you know What's the
never
magic
know.
ingredient?
You can't plan a hit. I mean, the only thing any artist can do, they might want a hit, and I think all artists do this. I don't want to make it in America. Yeah, like hell.
Yeah.
But basically, everyone wants a bigger audience, and of course, they want to get paid for it. But you can't plan that. You have to be prepared to fail. You have to be true to yourselves. We Will Rock You was not a bolted-on hit. Queen were actually in their biggest dip at the end of the turn of the century. You know, they were kind of. I remember when I first met Bryan, I said, "How you doing, mate?" He said, "Oh, still pretending to be a rock star." You know, I mean, like Freddie was gone, and so it wasn't a slam dunk by any means. And in fact, it took a long time to make money. It took 5 years before it broke. Well, maybe about 3.5 years to break even. You can't plan a hit. Obviously, in terms of having the Queen songbook, you've got about the best head start you could possibly imagine. I mean, the reason Rock You is a huge hit is mainly because Queen's music is so utterly fabulous, and it brings people together and makes people feel. Sorry?
Did you call it Rocky?
Rock You. Sorry, Rock You.
I'm so sorry. I thought it was some nickname you all have for it.
No, we call it Rock You. But it wouldn't have worked with just Queen. There's plenty of Queen tribute shows like ABBA. The biggest thing ABBA was the Bjorn Again, and they were big. They'd play one Wembley Arena or whatever. But to make a Mamma Mia, you needed the right story. And for ABBA, it was perfect. The sunny holiday romance, a girl who's wondering who her father is. She wants to get married, but she doesn't know who's going to give her away. Perfect for ABBA. And if they hadn't got that right, I'm telling you now, Mamma Mia would not have been a hit, and the Beach Boys one wasn't a hit. There's lots that have been hits when you think it's
most
a bolted
of them are not
on.
hits. Spice Girls.
Most of them are.
Yeah.
But so I actually think I did get the story right for Rock You. I think it is, and Bryan and Roger do too, and Freddie's family. Freddie's after the reviews hit. Freddie's mum, who saw the show first night, wrote the cast a letter because it was pretty devastating. I mean, we were predicted to close in 1 week.
That was bad reviews, right?
Very, very bad.
Yes.
I mean, very bad. We were on the news. Queen to close within a week is the critics' verdict.
As I say, 20 million people have now seen this musical.
It was very, very brutal. And of course, 100 people were staring immediate unemployment in the face. And a lot of the critics say they were very angry on Freddie's behalf. They all said Freddie would have hated this, as if Bryan and Roger, who were his brothers. And Deaky also, big thumbs up. I mean, John Deacon, he doesn't get involved. He stays at home. I've met him once when he told me, don't fuck it up, he said. And he said he loved the story. And I
always think John Deacon's got the perfect life. Yeah. He's got all that Queen money. Doesn't have to be recognised ever if he doesn't want to be. That's what I just imagine.
I think he would be recognised if he went out.
I imagine he's just sitting at home watching the snooker. And
so
then,
he gave us a big thumbs up. And so Queen were behind it. And Freddie's mum wrote after the reviews, and we were predicted on the news to close. I mean, we were a news story. She wrote, Freddie would have loved this show. I know it off by heart because we had it back up the stage for 12 years at the Dominion. Freddie would love this show. It's set in the future. Freddie always looks to the future. And above all, it's a comedy. Freddie always saw the funny side. And she said, if music be the food of love, rock on. And we did for 12 years at the Dominion.
That's good. Your relationship with critics is sort of throughout the book. We often come across critics. What is because a lot of people would never read any of their criticism. What is your relationship to the British critical community?
Well, I certainly don't read it either. I mean, I learned a very long time ago, you cannot read reviews, good or bad, because phrases will live in your head rent-free. You'll never stop writing letters of rebuttal. You'll never stop being angry. Obviously, we live in a free world, and actually I read reviews, and sometimes they can be great and interesting. I wish they would admit that they were subjective. I do wish they'd say, in my opinion, rather than this is a. And with me, it has always been quite personal. Because I became a famous comedian, everything I've ever done as a writer has been sort of reviewed through the prism.
Yes, how did the stand-up just sort of invert all of that? From being the backstage person, you then became a public target.
Yeah, but I suppose because I was political, and I've always used, when I'm doing my subjective writing, which is my stand-up act, I'm saying this is me kind of thing. I sometimes put my principles, the things that outrage me, that delight me into it, and certainly the 80s was a very divisive decade. We were young, who wasn't, angry about Thatch from where I came from in my topical written. But I used to say I can do 2 minutes on Thatch and an hour on my knob, and everyone says you're a political comedian. No, I'm a sexually repressed party comedian.
I do Thatch and knob.
And knob gags. And certainly the reason so I've always had to deal with the fact that, sparkly suited Thatcher bashing Ben Elton has written a new novel or whatever.
Isn't it funny?
You've written
Yes.
16 novels. Can I ask you something about writing? Sorry, Joey Kay says, you've been basically non-stop for the last 40 years as a writer. How do you have so much self-discipline? Can I add my thing onto it? Because I want to know this too. Can you explain to me how you write? What do you do? You go to your computer in the morning, and how long do you sit at it?
Yeah.
Because I'm really intrigued because you've done so
prolific.
much. And how many times do you rewrite it? Were there ones where you almost had 3 drafts of something and that was it? And were there things where you've done, 20 drafts of the same script?
Both, yeah. I mean, the Demolition, the first episode of The Young Ones, was basically written in one go and was virtually unchanged.
That's interesting.
Novels, plays, because sometimes I do, particularly with novels, sometimes I'll tinker for a very long time. Well, a long time for me. How do I write? You've got to sit down, and you can't walk around waiting for inspiration. You've got to sit at your desk.
Like you said, make the mark, and then change the mark, and then that's fine.
The only advice I'd ever give to any writer, or indeed any artist, is make the mark. Start. Don't try and write the perfect sentence. That image of the screwed up paper in the waste paper basket, that's the wrong way to go about it. You don't rip it out, carry on. It's okay, so it's a shit first sentence. You can come back to it. Maybe the whole first 5 pages will be shit, but eventually you'll get onto a roll, and then you can go back and fix it up. And certainly that's the way I work. Very rarely does something leap fully formed. Occasionally it does, like the example I just gave, and more so when I was young. But very quickly I learned. So I do a lot of editing.
Why?
And I
because you didn't know what you don't know, as you said in one of your statements.
I was working in my younger days towards these fantastic talents that were exciting me, and I was in the pub with them as well. We were not Rowan, obviously. I'm not sure he's ever been in a pub, but so it was all very organic and very wonderful. But slowly you sort of start to grow up. People have their own lives, and you're more working on you're working on your own. But yeah, you get up. You go to your study or wherever, and if it's on your knee on a bus in a cafe, I've done plenty of that. JK, she famously had to work in a cafe. It was the only warm place. You can't say I can't work unless I'm at my gîte in France. Yeah. If you're a writer, you can write anywhere. But I'm lucky. I've got a nice study, and I go and sit in it, and I try and stay there and try not to make too many cups of tea. Honestly, when I'm writing a novel, I'll drink 9 pints of tea a day. Not because I want the tea, but because if I go and make a cup of tea, that's 5 minutes when I'm not staring at the bloody screen.
Jack Thorne says he likes to get between 3 and 5. He sits in his office all day, but he says he likes to get between 3 and 5 usable pages of dialogue. Yeah. How much do you?
I've never ever.
You don't
a
set
lot
a
of
target.
people say that, and I've never. And Stephen tells a story of some great 19th century novel is who always wrote 100 or whatever. And if he finished a novel, he'd just start the next one so that he'd done his number of words
that day.
I'm not like that at all. I'm very relaxed. No writer works as hard as somebody who's got a normal job. If you work at a checkout or that's
not
hard.
Going down a mine.
It's not. It really isn't.
And
no writer, even you who are currently on this phenomenal role, it's firstly you're at home. It's nice. You can get up. And also, when you want to go and have dinner or go to the pub or not work that day, you don't have to. And I have a really full life. I've got a family and friends, and I enjoy them to the hilt. So I don't work all the time at all. I know we've only got seconds left, and we've hardly dealt with enough. I do want to finish what you asked about the critic thing, because I've never talked about it. And Rob Brydon read the book, and he I don't know him very well, but he read it, and he rang me, and forgive me the accent. He said, Ben, I had no idea you had so much shit thrown at you. I thought The Thin Blue Line was a critical success. And he basically said, why did you feel you have to bring it up? Because it's my autobiography. It's my story. And that has been a small part of it. And it's only a small part of the book. But I do talk about it because, to be constantly in a public eye and trolled for 40 years. Yeah. I mean, these days, everybody gets trolled. If you're on the internet, you're going to get trolled just at school.
You were a pioneer, though.
But I was a pioneer of being trolled. And
who was the original being
sometimes
trolled
it got
person.
you down a bit for a day or two. Critics have said you're very thin-skinned. My wife thinks I'm very thick-skinned because, you get quite a lot of it. And you try and avoid it, but someone will tell you. Someone will tell you a review in order to express their outrage. I thought it was awful when they called you a hypocritical, no-talent shit. I couldn't believe it. I nearly wrote a letter letter. And of course, your day is ruined because you haven't read the review.
When people go, I'm so sorry about that Sunday Times thing.
Exactly.
I didn't know about
why are you talking?
You know this. I'm just talking about a life in the public eye.
Because Ben, you have like 1 million wins that we are very happy for you to take.
Well, that's not, and I'm very happy for them. But even the wins tend to be castigate. Look, I don't want to go any further into it, but I don't talk about it except in the book, and it's because it has been a companion of mine. And in the absence of any real tragedy, up until Rik's death, I mean, now with people getting older in my family, I'm experiencing more sadness and unhappiness. But Rik's death was the first genuinely terrible blow that I felt. So yeah, maybe I've had such a lovely life. I've had time to get really annoyed about being slagged off in the papers.
But I mean, the reason we wanted to speak to you is because of this extraordinary career you've had and the extraordinary amount of successes you've had, what you've been through. And as you say, I think sometimes in the public, people see the shiny suit and go, oh, he's the guy from Saturday Night Live. And actually, to my mind, you're one of our great writers, and everything you've written for so many different medium, and no one has that many hits by accident. Okay,
it's unbelievable.
It doesn't happen. But lots of people listening to this, a lot of younger people listening to this, it is quite hard these days to create, to make things. We're living in a slightly different world. But the one thing that never changes is the creative impulse, is the bit in the head, the bit where a creator goes, I have something I want to say. What's the way that I can say it, and how can I get people to see it? What is your advice after a kind of a lifetime of doing these incredible things to anybody who's sitting there thinking, I just want to create something. I want to do something that people are going to love. I bet I never can. What's the advice?
The thing is, you can create. Anyone can create. The question is, will anybody else see it or read it? And that obviously is the great imponderable. And when if somebody wants to be an actor, I always say that the obvious, which is, you've got to ask yourself, if you devote your life to acting, basically working in bars, et cetera, getting the odd role, et cetera, when you come to be an old person and you look back and you say, and I had some nice parts and did a bit of Fringe that was really satisfying, but you never made it, will you still think you made the right decision about your life? Because if you can't honestly say that, then you should not be an actor. I think it's easier for writers because you can always find something of an audience with writing. You can self-publish, you can get on blogs. In the old days, there was fanzines. I know I've been unbelievably lucky. I don't need to check my privilege. I drip with it, and I am genuinely grateful and astonished for every opportunity I've had, just being born middle class with, a stable family, whatever. But I also know that my instinct to write was organic and instinctive. It started when I was 11 or 12. And had I not been successful, had not Rik made that phone call, I would have tried in every sense. I'd have sent my plays off as I was doing it. And had that, I'd have written for Amdram. I did Amdram all through my teens. I loved Amdram. My Artful Dodger is still fondly remembered in Godalming.
Yes. We haven't talked about your Artful Dodger, but of course we must.
Well, I don't think we're sadly going to have time today because I've whittled on and banged on. But the truth is, you have to believe it's a vocation, not an ambition. You have to believe that you want to create, you want to express yourself artistically in some manner, acting, painting, writing, and you're doing it first and foremost for yourself. And if you're successful, you continue to do it for yourself because that's the only way you can fulfill your contract with the audience, which is to say, this is what I think is good. This is what I believe in. If you don't like it, well, that's a shame. But at least I know I wasn't a hypocrite. I did my best. I'm not trying to please you. I'm trying to please myself. And you can do that, in private. You can do that with friends. You can do that, get up in a pub. And I'm not saying I would love not to have made. Of course, I'm grateful. I've had a very successful career and found an enormous audience. And I've had to work, hard to maintain that. But I also know that had I ended up getting a normal job, I think you use the term civilians. Had I ended up being a civilian, I listened to the podcast.
Civilian contractor.
I would be writing, and I would be with my local Amdram society. I'd be trying to get them to put my play on, or just do a sketch for a little review for charity. It's easy, You can, if you do it for charity, you'll get an audience. I'm not saying there's a lot of people out there thinking, it's easy for you. You have to believe that a life as an artist is this. You'll accept any kind of disappointment to pursue it. And if you can't face that, then don't.
Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure talking to you. And we had so many questions and not enough time to get through to all of them. So thank you to everyone who sent questions in. But the one thing that became apparent from the questions is, forget the critics, the love that people have for you and the joy you brought people over the years. We haven't even talked about the joy your novels brought me, for example, which they absolutely did. But all of the
You've
questions.
done too many things, Ben.
we were getting
and
in
I
at
really
this.
have forgotten. And I've had some good reviews as well. It's come up a lot.
Had some good reviews as well.
A career
That
of
could
my
have been a
length.
title.
I've had some good reviews as well. I've only ever addressed it in the book, and I wouldn't want anybody to think that's what I go around thinking. I am aware. I wish I'd been more aware at the time that some things I've done have meant a lot to people. And it's just lovely to know that now. So thank you.
Well,
for
they
that.
certainly
and to
have.
your listeners.
Thank you so much for coming talking to us.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.